coming up in this episode.
And of course, once you reach scale, then you've got data as well. Because one of the challenges founders have is they go, why does the investor want that? Am I the only idiot in the world who's going to agree to that draconian term? Or am I the only idiot in the world to push back on it, and it's completely standard? So how do you know what things you should reasonably push back on or not? And your lawyer is probably going to do one funding round every several months, but a platform is doing several funding rounds per day. So if you can leverage the data, you have a much better result.
As we're seeing things kind of come back, will have left a mark to some extent, right? I'm already with some friends of mine, connections within the investment space, fellow investors. I know that they are forming funds as a result,
right?
And ex-founders, ex-operators who, similar to you, maybe gone through the startup ecosystem and you decided, right, okay, this is a problem I saw in the legal side of things. This is now one that everyone has seen very publicly in terms of the investor side of things. And now looking, okay, let's put funds together that do things differently.
I think, the goal is, from the founder perspective, finding investors is difficult. But what if your investor could find investors for you? And that's really what a syndicate is. And the syndicate is, an investor gets their WhatsApp group together, finds companies to invest in, finds other people to co-invest with them, and then can get a carry, which incentivizes them. They get some money back, as a profit if they want to, on the sale of the shares later. So if you could leverage your investor to find other investors, that's going to be helpful. And likewise, as an investor, you might want to invest in companies, but it makes more sense to invest a small amount in 10 companies than a big amount in one company.
The Founders Unplugged podcast, hosted by Greg McCallum. Raw, uncensored conversations with startup founders.
So hello, I'm Anthony Rose. I'm founder and CEO at SeedLegals. Once upon a time, some years back, I used to head up BBC iPlayer, and then I left the B, built a startup, sold it, built a startup, sold it, invested in a few, got tired of paying lawyers, decided to, met my co-founder, whose idea it was, and built SeedLegals. We're about 160 people, and instead of going to a law firm, you'd come to SeedLegals, get on our platform, and with our team and our automation, everything you need to do to hire your employees, and in particular, raise a funding round, do all the legals for the round, give EMI options to your team, and get your R&D tax back. So about 1 in 3 of all early stage funding rounds or investments in the UK is now done on our platform. And for companies getting SEIS, I think the HMRC released the numbers, 51% of them, when you last calculated, get done through SeedLegals.
Wow.
So I'm here to share, the data we've got, and from talking to thousands, literally, of founders, if, to the extent that this goes that route, to help you grow your business.
Fantastic. So thanks for that. And thanks for indulging me on that one. So, I mean, those are really amazing numbers. I had no idea that it was that high, that of the sort of market share, if you will, that you've managed to capture. And that's in the UK, right?
Exactly, yes. Yeah. We're also in France and Ireland, but more modest there. We started earlier in the UK.
Yep. Right. And do you have offices out there too, or is this all sort of more remote?
We do. We've got 10 people at Station F in Paris, although just like everywhere else, everyone works hybrid these days, but in theory, yes.
Fair enough. What an amazing achievement. And how long has SeedLegals been operational for?
We had the idea back in 2016 and launched in early 2017. So, yeah.
So, I mean, that makes those numbers even more impressive, really, when you consider that time frame and the various things that occurred during that time frame that sort of robs everyone of time operationally, right? That's astounding.
Yes.
What do you think has contributed to that sort of level of success?
I think not being a lawyer. But right. Jokes aside, my mantra with my team is, what would a law firm do? And then let's do completely the opposite.
Right.
But jokes aside, what's interesting, I think, is that when you go to a law firm, their work product is a legal document. And when you come to SeedLegals, our goal is you get videos, you get data, you get articles, and what you do, the Google SEO is going to pick it up. You get our team with 5-minute response time. There's no billing by the hour or by the minute. It's all included. And by the way, yes, there's a legal contract at the end of it that gets created. But what people are looking for is, what's my company valuation? I've had a fight with my co-founder. What should I do? And legal contracts are partly an answer to it, but actually data from our thermometer over thousands of rounds shows, in general, this is the histogram of what people are agreeing, so that So, and for early stage founders, they want to know the formula for how to grow their business. And so we do lots of webinars, workshops, events to show you things that we don't sell, how to build a sales team, how to do LinkedIn outreach, how to pick a valuation in your funding round. So I think it's a combination of understanding, we hope, this, not trying to sound full of myself, but try and understand what the customer is actually looking for and providing that. And often it's a lot more than just the legal service or the service that you are monetizing.
Was that always the aim, to provide those sort of additional, almost auxiliary services and sort of data sets and knowledge bases around the basis of making sort of the legal side of running a business easy? Or was it almost a side effect of realizing that you needed to sort of do some content marketing and get in front of people, and then just sort of went, okay, this is working, so let's run with it, let's make it well, maybe a bit of both? What came first? Maybe
that's a great point, and I loved our rolling discussion here. So it's actually a combination of a few things. I think the first thing was content marketing. I'm a huge fan of content marketing, and I'm amazed that companies don't do more of it. So what is content marketing? Well, you know that you can give vast amounts of money to Facebook and Google or paid ads, but don't do that, because they've already got more money than you. Right. You want to, and if you haven't got a lifetime value that's greater than your customer acquisition costs, you're just going to go bankrupt doing that. So what can you do? Well, of course, there's SEO, but SEO needs to find content. So if you write articles and you get your team to write articles, it's got lots of advantages. Firstly, it gives your team members some excitement, some voice. Secondly, if you can't write a good article that explains what you do, you've got a problem with what you do. So by writing an article, it forces you to actually put the problem in the user's mind, rather than, we use blockchain to do X. Your article is, I want to solve this problem. The next thing is it actually makes your customer support more efficient, because instead of writing out an lengthy answer each time, you can just point to an article. And what I really like is, I'm a member of quite a few founder groups, and there's a good fraction of questions that people ask and sort of are in our scope. And I'd say about 80% of the time, the answer is an article. So another one of my mantras is answer with an article. And if we don't have an article, write one. So there's a lot of content. And then I think the other piece is that quite frequently I'll meet people who are domain experts in something, like how to expand to America or build a sales team. Sometimes my colleagues have hired this person for our team to give us advice and so on. But I figure, wait, if I'm learning something, let's do a webinar together so that everybody can learn. Right. So I'm doing one in a week or two on how to write great content. There's another one I did with an ex-criminal barrister, now turned pitch deck coach, on how to great storytelling in pitch decks. Why criminal barrister to pitch deck coach? Well, this is Claire McMillan. And actually, if you Google SeedLegals Claire McMillan, you'll see an excellent webinar where she relates how, in her years of being a criminal barrister, cases were hardly ever won or lost on the facts. Slightly scary. It was always on the storytelling. So let's now bring that to pitch deck. So the content and the articles stem from a range of reasons. And I think, lastly, just personally, I think lawyers do the same thing again and again. They, you want a contract, here's a contract. Software developers refuse to do anything in life more than once. They're going to write a program for it. If you ask them to do something twice, they'll write a program for it. Whether it's the right solution or not, they're going to write a program.
Right, let's automate this.
Exactly. And I'm somewhere in between, which is, I also dislike doing something more than once. So the third time somebody asks us a question, okay, let's write an article on it.
Right,
and then you just end up with a great body of content that is really useful for everybody.
Yeah. I love the fact that you mentioned, well, there was a couple of things you mentioned there I love, but I really love what you mentioned about customer success. I think there's a massively overlooked element of running a startup in general, but also something that I don't think is given enough thought early doors when it comes to building an organization and sort of doing exactly what you said, which is kind of building as you go. If you're already having to explain this to someone early on, make it an article, make it a tutorial, get it there. And like you said, it serves those multiple purposes. You know, if you're explaining something to someone about your service and how it works, or an additional side of information, whatever it might be, the chances are that's going to be useful content to pump out into the world and generate interest, because it shows your authority. So I really love the fact that you mentioned that. I've actually managed to come to the conclusion over the recent years that customer success is probably the more important business development piece in a business than business development to some degree, actually, as a result. So how did you come to that? Yeah, how did you? Presumably, you sort of came to these conclusions and ways of working because of your experience that you mentioned. You've done a considerable amount throughout your career and in your various ventures. So do you mind if we kind of go back a little bit and talk about that? So you mentioned that you were, what was your position with iPlayer? What did you do?
I headed up iPlayer from pre-launch for 3 years until I moved on to other things. So yeah.
Wow. So talk me through that. How did that project come about? How did you get involved with iPlayer?
So I used to be with a company called Brilliant Digital, which was part of Kazaa, music, file sharing, internet, so mass content distribution, millions of users every day. And I kept bumping into a guy called Eric Huggers, who was at Microsoft at the time, and we met at various media conferences. And one day he got a job at the BBC, heading up the BBC's digital media. And Eric's got a fabulous Rolodex, for those who remember what Rolodex is, a file of contacts. So
there's lots of people Googling Rolodex right now. Like, what on earth is this? Like, seeing some ancient thing on Google.
Exactly, a file of facts. That's another. Anyway, so
a landline.
The BBC had been noodling over iPlayer for years, and it was sort of an R&D project. But I kept hearing about it at these conferences, but it never seemed to be getting anywhere. Anyway, Eric gave me a call. I was living in Australia at the time, and said, "We're looking for someone to head up iPlayer. How would you like to join the BBC?" And I went, "The BBC? Where are the stock options?" But I was persuaded to move to London, and this was in 2007, and arrived at the BBC. And there was an announcement saying, "Welcome, Anthony. The iPlayer launches in 3 months on Christmas Day with some promotion and around the Doctor Who airing. So good luck, Anthony and team." It's like, oh shit, this is so the BBC is quite famous for its endless stakeholder and committee meetings, and everyone wants a piece of the pie. But everyone thought this was going to be a complete train wreck. So their best bet was to leave Anthony completely alone, and he would be on the first flight back to Australia on Boxing Day. So I managed to get somewhat free reign. And but per your question, the customer service piece and so on, these days everyone, I mean, who's read the literature and has read Lean Startup and knows about MVP and customer-centric development and things like that. But back in 2007, those were new, at least to me. And you didn't have this sort of guide you could pick up to say what to do. And looking back, I'm quite intrigued, because I made stuff up as I went along. I didn't know any of these things. But to me, the customer-centric piece, which is everything you do, is based on solely one goal: give the customer a great experience and a solution to what they're looking for. So when I arrived at the BBC, the iPlayer was in not the best state. Nothing worked very well. It wasn't user-friendly. And the reason was that different factions in the BBC all wanted their slice of that pie. The editorial team wanted to control the editorial, which meant the programs couldn't go live immediately. And the content distribution team wanted to reduce the content distribution costs. So video quality was rubbish. And there was a horrible P2P thing that was being used. Anyway, I figured So I spent ages late at night. I was on the last tube home, and before White City Station closed, going through everything. And I made a list of about 100 things that just didn't work very well. And I went to the tech team, and they, went through each one of them to try and dismiss it. Anthony, you're the only one using Windows with that configuration. And Anthony, you're the only one with using this browser. And I deduced that, there were 100 things. And even if each of them only affected 1 in 100 people, overall, any given person was going to have a terrible experience.
Sure.
But it was hard to convince the tech team. So I needed to find an end user. So I went to the BBC's. I found that they've got like a testing department, and I said, "Great, can you test this?" And they went, "Yes, it'll cost £20,000 and take 6 weeks." And I went, "Okay, I'm not spending £20,000, and I don't have 6 weeks because I'll launch in 12. It's not going to work." So I developed what I call now Anthony's chocolate box test. So I went to the supermarket and bought 3 big Lindt chocolate boxes, and then found non-techie people, which is basically the legal team on level 5, and went, "If I give you this fine box of chocolates, will you come downstairs and test my products?" And the person said yes. So I set up big screens, and the person came in, and I gathered the tech team around, and I said, "What's your favorite program?" And she said, "Jonathan Ross," and takes us back, of course. And anyway, she then proceeded to try and find it. And it was a complete disaster. Nothing worked. And so the tech team's, jaws dropped. And anyway, after that ended, I said, "Okay, team, we're going to pick the 3 biggest issues we found today, and in 48 hours, we're going to fix those, and we're going to keep repeating until people can find the show they want." And it works. And it took us a few more than 2 days, but we sorted those. And essentially, after the 3rd or 4th box of chocolates that it cost me, then we had solved the major problems, and the person came along and said, "What do you like, EastEnders?" "Oh, there it is on the homepage. Click. Oh, it plays. Great, job done." So the relentless focus on only one thing, which is the customer, and to do a lot of customer testing and, in fact, customer research before you build your idea in the first place.
I love that. I mean, it's interesting because, you're, like you mentioned, you're up against an organization where a lot of people have their own sort of vested interests and priorities, and building a product by committee just doesn't work, right? And there's very rarely works, let's just say. Which, I mean, it's hard enough to build a product on your own, let alone with a small team, let alone with a very large team with way too many resources and all these different ideas. So it's really interesting to see how you tackled that. So what led you to the conclusion? I mean, aside from maybe you utilizing what they had built so far and coming to that conclusion, like, for me, I can see how this doesn't work. What led you to the conclusion that you needed to focus on the customer experience more than anything else? I mean, it might sound like an obvious question, but I'm curious to know sort of how you.
Yeah, great point. I think 2 things. Firstly, as I was looking at the various stakeholders, they're all trying to optimize for what was right for them within the business. So, the BBC as a whole decided it needed an iPlayer, a central place you could go to get all programming on your device whenever you wanted. But that was by no means taken as a good idea by the rest of the organization. Each channel is fiercely competitive and separate. So actually, the BBC One didn't want an iPlayer. They wanted a BBC One iPlayer, and BBC Two wanted a BBC Two. It would have been a disaster. I mean, you'd have to go to 4 separate places, and search wouldn't work. I mean, it was a terrible idea. So the fact that there was one was a great idea, but the forces of the channel programmers were pulling it in other directions. So thing number 1 was, as soon as I saw the reason for many things not being brilliant were because of internal groups pulling it the one way. The other thing is, previously I'd been at Kazaa, the music file sharing, and on one of the best weeks, there was 16 million new installs. And every morning you'd wake up and the drug would be to see the user traffic. But you would also see the stats for things that, the file download failure rates or something. And then it became an obsession, because if you've got millions of people using it, your product, if 1 in a million or 1 in 1,000 people, for example, has some error, that's going to be thousands of people a day with the error. So you're trying to look for every person, even at like 1 in 1,000 level where something doesn't work, and improve it, because then overall it's better for everyone. I think that sort of focus from the huge numbers of people using a product to try and whittle down the error rate. And of course, if people are having problems or calling your support team, then it's super critical to reduce that, because otherwise your support's going to cost you a lot of money and you're going to have a lot of unhappy users. And I'm always amazed that companies just leave bugs in their products and can't be asked fixing them clearly when something is obviously broken. Your local bank app is usually the one that comes to mind. So
yeah, well, the EE app never works. I don't understand that. I've had it for years. It still doesn't work. It drives me up the wall. But no, that's really yeah. I mean, I share that frustration and that bewilderment, because it's as we all know in the day, especially in the age of the internet, bad news and bad reviews spread faster than good news and good reviews. So all it takes sometimes is 1 in 1,000. But one person in 1,000 is more likely to tell 10 people that this product is crap versus 1,000 people, or 9,999 telling even one person that it's good. Because if something functions as it tells you it should, you're not going to rave and rant and rave about it as much as when it doesn't perform as you'd expect it or as it should. So it's
exactly. And actually, when I joined the BBC, it had gone beyond that, because of course now you know that you're going to get a bad NPS score or Trustpilot or something review. But when I joined the BBC, there were literally people in yellow biohazard suits protesting outside because iPlayer was going to use digital rights management. Now, when you license content from Hollywood, they insist on copy protection so people can't download it. But people can always record things on television. So now, as you move from a television age into an internet age, can you tell Hollywood, sorry, your latest Mission Impossible movie, we're just going to let people download it and, then they can share it. And they're going to go, nice one, you're not going to have our movie. So if you want their movie, you have to put DRM, digital rights management, on it. But there were quite a few people who didn't want that and protested. And so the team was quite traumatized that they literally had to go through protesters in biohazard suits outside complaining about something as arcane as whether you'd be using Microsoft content protection on a downloaded file. I mean, the good news is the world has moved on. Yeah. Everyone knows that you don't get to download your show from Netflix or Amazon or whatever and then reshare it. Everything is protected. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. There is a thought that it shouldn't be protected, but the rules of the game are if you don't get the movie. And it was, in my view, people would prefer to have the movie than not have the movie. So, you need to come up with a system that was non-intrusive and worked well and so on. But yes, now you can think about, well, there are no people in biohazard suits protesting outside, so it's not too bad. So,
yeah, not yet. Maybe there'll be something else soon enough.
Exactly.
So, I mean, needless to say, you launched the iPlayer, and it was it considered a success at the time when it launched, or did that maybe take some time to bear out?
It was a huge success when it launched. The biohazard people went away. People start writing good things about the BBC, and so no, it was very successful. And I mean, then people began to see that it was going to be, the future. And what I was really impressed by is, back at the time, broadcast was 98% or whatever of all media consumption was broadcast TV. But the BBC had been one of the first to think about, changing that and to some extent putting themselves out of business, or at least redefining their role as, instead of we have a television and bandwidth on the TV, is we have programming and different ways you can view it. And it was a brave step, but and then other broadcasters followed. But the bit that ultimately had me think about moving on to other things. And ultimately, I think is going to be the demise of the broadcasters, is they never took the next step, which is redefining what is content. And broadcasters still to this day make exactly the same programming they made before, stuff they filmed weeks or months ago. A nice program with David Attenborough and Turtles, designed to be watched in, half an hour. And success is higher and higher HD, 4K, UHD definition.
Right.
Whereas Twitch, TikTok, YouTube Shorts and so on are all redefining what is content. And back in those days, Facebook video and so on and YouTube were much smaller, but the channel owners and the content team at the broadcasters, denigrated that. They said it's just, cats and skateboards and it's for kids. It's like, dude, kids are going to grow up. Oh,
right.
no, they're going to grow up and they're going to not want that crappy content. It's low quality. But the quality is going to get better. And now, ironically, a good fraction of all consumption is what they would have defined as low quality. But ironically, the only way I can watch 4K is on the internet through Netflix or Amazon, not on broadcast. So times have moved. And I think this is the problem, which is the digital teams innovated, but the content teams just did not get out of their way of thinking. And I think their lesson clearly, just like in my previous gig at Kazaa, where the music companies thought that success was selling vinyl records and then success was selling CDs. And they never, 2 decades later, finally got to recognize that streaming is the way to go.
Right.
And it took Spotify 20 years later, to start. I'm not even sure it's profitable, but to start, that change in thinking. And yes, and broadcasters, you really still aren't doing that, and their share will just keep dwindling. And they may have left it way too late because others have now built those major aggregation portals and so on as well.
Yeah, and it's tough because from both music and content production perspective, if you want to talk movies, TV, whatever it might be, it doesn't really seem like the answer is that obvious though to those solutions. I mean, especially when we talk about the Netflixes of the world and these other streaming services like Disney Plus and so on, which is very famously dying a very obvious and public death right now, for numerous reasons. But it doesn't seem to be obvious what the solution to that is, because like you said, the younger generations now seem to be far more interested in this sort of short form content. And I heard something really bizarre the other day. I can't remember the exact number, but there was a survey done of young people recently about their experiences with the cinema. And an astounding amount of people in the sort of, I think it was around the sort of 11 to 16
right,
had never been to the cinema. And I found it astounding. And like they were asked, if it was a choice of something to do as a with your friends, would you go? It said no, and it just wasn't a thing. Films just aren't a thing. They're not interested in films. They're interested in probably maximum 10-minute length YouTube videos, of Mr. Beast or something, or PewDiePie. And it's like, I don't understand. I don't really know how Netflix can solve that problem, other than adding a short section. A bit. I can't remember the name of what was the name of that streaming service. You might remember that tries to create. They tried to create a platform like that, didn't they? And they very famously tanked very quickly. They got a lot of very high profile creators to create a lot of short projects, and then it died on its ass. I can't remember what it was called, but
that's the one with Meg Whitman, the ex-eBay person,
right.
had funded. They raised about $1 billion, spent about $1 billion, and got very little from it. I think it might have been Vessel, but
right.
The challenge there is, it was a brave step. There weren't people looking for short-form content, but what was missing is that I think people weren't looking for their created short form content. They were looking for user generated short form content and vast amounts of it. So it was and
they spent an enormous amount of money on these very high profile creators, which obviously put them in a very vulnerable situation financially.
Exactly. But I think more broadly, to go from broadcasters to any industry, your challenge is that if you've got a profitable a big business and you're the incumbent, but technology is beginning to change things. And what is your strategy? And, my first observation of that was with the music industry, who were doing $12 billion a year in sales of music, of CDs and records. That was declining at $1 billion a year. So you've got, large amounts of money, but going down. And so, at Kazaa and other file sharing applications, the idea was to persuade the music industry that the future was online. But instead of the music industry embracing it, they decided to spend $100 million literally a year on trying to sue them out of existence. But the march of technology is inexorable. So, their sales continue to go down before many years later, between Spotify and Apple and others, new services arose. And I think the same goes for broadcasters. You've got 100% market share, and now some small player rises. Another great example is the phone companies and Skype. Phone companies are doing billions of years of pounds a year in business at usurious charges. I mean, try calling Australia back in those days, like £10 a minute or something, whatever. It was insane. And then Skype would take billions out of that entire industry without making much money itself. So how do you behave in that space? And I think that's one of the key, things that sort of, in a sense, hypothetically keeps me up at night, which is that will you be disrupted in your own disruptive business? Will you think, oh, great, we've changed someone's business. We now are market leader, but it's not a competitor coming up that's going to do the same as you that will end up biting you. Or something like, oh, no one's going to do contracts. So it's going to be AI, or it's going to be blockchain, or it's going to be smart contracts. No one's going to read a contract. My AI bot will parse it. So we think that's a bit silly at the moment, but at some point it may not be silly. And then are you going to be one of the dinosaurs that doesn't embrace change and put yourself out of business? Which is why I like saying to the team, let's constantly use technology to put ourselves out of business. It doesn't mean anyone's going to be without a job. It means that you're going to reinvent your role as sales or customer experience or whatever it might be into, AI prompt engineer or whatever it might be.
Right.
So, yeah.
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head, and I absolutely agree with you. I think that it's an inevitability with any entity, with any organization, that you will become redundant unless you are continuously, keeping your ear very close to the ground as to what is in the pipeline culturally, societally, and economically, and to some extent politically, to ensure that you're on the right path. And of course, I think that becomes almost institutionally very difficult by the definition of a large company, a large corporation, because of the way that those are structured. Sort of inherently create a bureaucracy system that makes the channeling of new ideas slower and slower. And so, I think the only real way to achieve a company that is set for life to be able to do that is to keep it lean, essentially, to ensure that there's levels of bureaucracy that don't prevent the good ideas, new ideas from the bottom up, or from the top down, being able to move into production quickly, because that's I think what generally kills it. I mean, there's a lot of companies that I think do it right, in the world. They have good and bad things about them, but I mean, Apple is a fairly good example of that, I think, to an extent, but they do things their own way. But I think actually a better one that is quite often slept on is Nintendo. Nintendo is a great example of an organization that has built its entire history on shifting from one thing to the next, taking huge risks, and they still do. That take huge swings at things, and they miss a lot, but they take huge swings in their little slice of their sector, and as a result, they end up, they have more misses than hits, but as a result, I think they're moving, and they don't get complacent, to kind of your point about complacency, essentially, right?
It's a great point. And I must say, for any startup, your exit for your startup and the place that the founders and the investors make a return on their time and capital is when they're bought by a larger company. So I think what usually happens is a large company grows, realizes that they can't do innovation anymore, and then decides to innovate by buying smaller companies. So it's a case of the little fish being eaten by the big fish. There's nothing wrong with that. The founders and investors, hopefully cash out, make some good money, become investors or founders again themselves, and build the next generation of fish. But the irony is, as soon as the big company buys a little company, it sets its morass of stakeholder meetings on the newly acquired company, right, which then ceases to be as innovative as before. So they have to rinse and repeat. And the challenge is how you...
It's almost like Medusa, wandering around and staring at all of these various startups to make them part of their own, their own sort of auditorium and display, but they're now petrified in stone and they can no longer move forward.
Exactly.
I recently rewatched Clash of the Titans, so that's stuck in my mind.
See. Well, the other thing is, large corporates usually talk about innovation. Of course, innovation is important, and we've got an innovation lab. What they've done is they've taken a room, put some bean bags and some cuddly toys in it, and called it the innovation thing.
Right, but, so they can get some R&D tax relief.
Exactly. So my yardstick is, the more that a company mentions the word innovation, the less innovative they actually are. And what is innovation? Innovation is actually just taking away the checks that have to be done before you can do anything. So if your team member can come up with an idea, have some budget, I can spend $2,000 on, user research testing, and I can get Airtable, and there's nothing blocking me running, these ChatGPT or whatever, and I can come up with something, test it myself. If people love it, I can start using it, and if more people use it, then it gets turned into something. So people should just, take the brakes off, let people have ideas, let people run with it, and remove the people who need to approve it. So, a nice thing I heard was, in the company you work for, how many people need to say yes before you can do something? And if the answer is 0, that's great, but you've probably got anarchy because people are working on all sorts of shit. If the answer is 17, your company's basically dead because nobody can do anything.
Yeah, so you're essentially a government body by that point.
Exactly. And if the answer is, to 1 or 2 or 3, it's, it means your manager or colleague or something like that. That seems about a sensible number. And of course, the number should vary depending on the scale of it and what can go wrong. So, you want to try out ChatGPT in your business, the answer should be 0. Anyone who wants at SeedLegals, they get ChatGPT team access. Knock yourself out, go for it, present on our Monday morning stand up the cool things you've got with ChatGPT. You don't need to ask for something, just do it. I mean, ChatGPT team means that any data you put into it does not go into the general training model. So that gets over one of the big barriers, which is you can't put confidential information in. So, let your team try it, and don't hold back on it. And if you don't, you're just going to see your business eaten by AI in the future.
100%. Yeah. It's interesting as well because just really quickly, because it was in my mind when we were talking about content as a big problem, because it is a hugely fascinating industry. I have a lot of interest in it. It seems to me as well that I don't entirely agree with to some extent what we were both saying about the trend is for this very short form, horizontal, vertical, whatever, content, because actually every now and then something gets released and it's a massive success, right? And you get, a more traditional TV show, for example. A great example of that was like Midnight Mass recently. I don't know if you watched that on Netflix. And the guy who made that, I forgot his name now, the writer-director, he produced a couple of different things that were hugely successful on Netflix, the Haunting of Hill House and a few other. So these things happen and they become cultural phenomena and people love them in some ways. And then when you talk about music, and I was involved in the music industry in my younger years to some extent too, you put on an amazing show and you actually really put in a great show, and you focus on all elements of that show, and you care greatly about the end user experience to a degree. You will find success if you grind at it. So, and we're seeing that with musicians now. There's some musicians that have rised up out of social media to become very prominent because they're focused on all of those elements, not just how loud they are on social media or how prolific they are with making videos or something. So it's like, it seems to me that there is still an appetite for genuine good quality within these spaces. And so I wonder if maybe it's because of the democratization to some extent of these creative spaces has meant anyone can become a content creator, anyone can become a musician in their bedroom, that actually we just end up with such a homogenization of bad quality that's actually the thing that's putting people off going to the cinema, paying for things, because they're scared. Is my money going to, am I going to get a good return on investment? And I feel like the proof of that is the fact that every now and then you see these, like June just came out and it's killing it. Barbie, Oppenheimer, these things do happen. So do you see what I'm not sure if there's a question in there. It's more just sort of an observation.
Sure. I don't think anyone's suggesting you don't want a glorious high def, high quality movie experience, or David Attenborough's utterly stunning ocean exploration. That's all great. I think of course it's going to be a mixture, right? You're going to flip through TikTok things and you're going to watch a long format movie. I think what is interesting is that in the past, the broadcasters, whether they thought it or not, were three things. They were a destination. You would go to a channel on your TV, and that was the place you would go to get the content. Right. There were a distribution mechanism that was the broadcast airwaves, and they were a content creator. And they were the home of all three of them. But what's happened is the likes of Netflix and Amazon, they are the new aggregator. You go to those places and you've seen all the BAFTA channel and all the others that want to be their own destination sites are now unable to do that. You have to take your content, put it in someone else's site.
Because no one wants to have 20 subscriptions.
Exactly.
We're basically back at cable TV days now. It's become a problem.
That's right. And having the fact that broadcasters did not get together, across many of them and create their own destinations for across multiple ones, meant that now the aggregators control things. And if they put your show at the top of the homepage in the rotating carousel, you're going to get eyeballs. And if they don't put on the homepage, you're going to get 0 views. So, they obviously in general are not malicious. They're going to go and promote the ones they promote the ones they funded and the ones that are popular. And there's multiple algorithms. But the broadcasters have now increasingly lost out on being the destination, and it won't be that much longer until the programs they create, they're going to get more content views, not in their own channels or their own iPlayer like experiences, but in someone else's destination. And then the owner of that destination will now decide what is the content that people want, and upscale or downscale on the homepage, the shorts or the long form and so on, and that will then drive more. So, once you've lost out being the destination, you're now relegated to being only a content provider. And there's nothing wrong with being a content provider. There are many movie studios that are content providers, but you then have to recognize that half your org is now, redundant, because you didn't need the channel operators and all the others. You just need to make programs, and you need to sell programs to the people who pay the most and so on. So everything changes once you lose out being the destination.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, we could talk about this side of things all day, but I've got other questions I want to ask you as well. Which, so after iPlayer, and presumably you like you mentioned, a considerable amount of success in that launch, and then you stuck around there for a number of years. What contributed the decision to move on, and which you touched on a little bit, and then what was it that you moved on to next after that?
Well, I think the initial problem space at iPlayer was a technical one. Could you get the video to stream, and could you compress it, and could the programs come out just after TV, which is what the licensing allowed? Right. And could you create an interface? And it was hard work solving the technical problems, but at some point the technical problems were solved. The BBC's only got a finite amount of content. You don't need to create this amazing content recommendation system, because actually all the shows you want, about, and there are a couple on furniture making and trips to Hungary that you might have not known about, which can be featured. but it's kind of like a solved problem.
Mm.
And also, I think one of the things I've learned over the years is,
if you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please like and subscribe with notifications turned on.
you do well when you are the audience. So, if you're a founder and you're making a business there that someone just like you would be the user of your product, in fact, you are the own user of your own product, then that is a good sign. At SeedLegals, we run our business on our platform. Every time I want to hire somebody, I create an employment contract on the platform. It's brilliant. And if it's not brilliant, then we realize there's an issue and we go and sort it, because it makes no sense that we don't use our own platform. But what I realize is in my iPlayer days, the BBC did just after launch, a couple of months later, they did an audience survey to find out who the iPlayer users were. And it turned out they were sort of white male geeks, middle class, liked gadgets and, Top Gear. It was basically exactly me. They even dressed them in black. So,
right.
It was
what we would call now tech bros, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I say I built it for myself was wrong, because it wasn't me.
Sure.
It was me.
Accidentally.
Exactly. But then a year or so later, it was now showing that, in fact, it was, females watching EastEnders at lunchtime, looking to see how they could use the keyboard with one hand, so you could eat a sandwich and find a show to watch, and so on. And they were watching, for 20 minutes or so. So the user base was now outside my core area, and the problem to solve was not a technical one, it was a content one. Right. So give people the programming they want, because the distribution is there. And anyway, so it was now time to get back to startup roots, and I built a company called Beamly. Beamly was to, in fact, change the way we watch TV. It didn't use AI in those days, but clever technology. So you'd have your phone in your hand while you're watching TV. It would analyze the subtitles on TV to show you what's being spoken about. You could interact with game shows and other things. It was a newfangled TV guide and a social network around TV. And we raised lots of money from Sky, Comcast, Viacom, and NBC to really change the way we watch TV. In the event, I sold it a few years later to Coty, the brand, because we developed a very nice brand integration for advertising and content experiences and so on. And then create another startup, Six Tribes, which got sold to Jeremy Clarkson and the team at Drive Tribe as a companion app for their Drive Tribe program. And then met my co-founder and did SeedLegals.
Right, and so. Yeah, quite a, and then that's over a period of how many years? All
that was like 5 years or so. Yeah.
Really? So that's a lot. Wow. Okay. So we're talking, quick go to market and quick exits there. Over that period.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting. And had you always been something of an entrepreneur? Like, is that something that you'd always had? So, like, going through school and college and so on. And was it something you sort of came straight into, or did that come a bit later?
The accidental entrepreneur.
Right.
I think to me the bug bit when I was still at school, and I was I liked making circuit boards and electronics and so on, and I was living in Cape Town at the time, and there was an Apple store, the first Apple store, run by this slightly crazy American, and they ran a computer club. And anyway, I took one of the circuit boards that I'd made over to the computer store to demo it. I was quite proud of it. Plugged into your Apple and gave it more functionality into your Apple II, which dates me. And they said, "Hey, that's awesome. We'll buy 20 of them." I went, Are you mentally? You want to buy these? So anyway, I thought that was quite intriguing. And so I set to work to commercialize it. And I sat on the kitchen floor with my mother and brother and sister and assembled these into boxes and put labels. And it was probably quite amateurish in retrospect.
What did they do?
Actually, So the original Apple II computer could only do uppercase characters, and this lets it do upper and lowercase. And then there was one to make it go faster and bring it more memory and so on.
Oh, wow.
And so the first one was sort of accidental, but then my next idea, I thought, maybe I'll make one that will actually be sellable. So my first company was a hardware electronics company. I had a robot for making circuit boards at home and it's called a hot belt surface mount reflow machine, a big machine for soldering things and so on as well. And I had a mini production thing at home. But those are the days when you didn't have venture capital. You couldn't just raise money with SEIS and so on. So you had to build a kind of a proper business. You had to, borrow some money and then, make a profit, and then you could use the profit to buy more parts. And if you didn't make a profit, then you were out of business.
Good old-fashioned business.
The old-fashioned business, exactly. And of course, obviously the fundamentals are the same. You have to ultimately have a business that generates profit and revenue. But these days, you have a lot more possibility of getting started with, equity fundraising, and things have changed dramatically. But the grounding in running a proper business, so to speak, where, if you didn't pay your bills this month, there was no next month, and no one was just going to give you money for shares. Not that I even knew what that was back in those days. So I think that was, excellent. But that was the bug that went, oh, wait, let me think about how we can do this as an idea that will, scale.
And was every business that you put together, would you say, and this is a hard thing to maybe measure, but a success?
I think firstly, life is always random. I think, you like to think that people go, what did you choose and how did you choose to do this next? And you go, well, I analyzed this and looked at the market and, looked at my core skill sets. But no, you meet someone at a party and that's what you do next. And
gut instinct and just sheer determination and
it's random. So my last venture, the investor in my last venture had his 50th birthday party in Rome and invited me and others to Rome for quite a lavish 50th birthday party. He's Italian, and I was there, and there I met my now co-founder Laurent at SeedLegals, and we were, over lunch, he was saying the problem that he as a VC and serial angel investor had with lawyers and funding rounds and so on, and I'd sold my last business. So, the doing SeedLegals was like doing music distribution, broadcast, social, and now law. Where did that come into? So yes. In a business, sometimes you can, what are the outcomes of a business? You could run out of money and have to close down. You might become profitable and never need to fundraise again. You might need to keep fundraising, or you might sell the business. And as your business goes through different stages, you're always and should always be thinking, each month, shut down, sell, grow, raise. And you never know. And sometimes, you are struggling fundraising and an acquisition offer arises, or you have an acquisition offer and you don't go for it and you fundraise. So, I think sometimes you never really know whether something is a success, or it seems like a temporary success, but it's not, or it's a temporary failure, but it turns out to be a long-term success. I think it's a rollicking answer to a question where I think I always seem to think the journey is still going, and it's hard to know whether changing this thing in the past would have negatively or positively affected all other things since then.
Yeah. That can cause a bit of a brain malfunction if you spend too much time on it, right? Yeah, for sure. But it's interesting because you're talking about how you'll start building a more traditional business, right? In the sense of we have to basically make more money than we spend. That's a business, right? We have to build something for X amount, and then we have to sell it for however many times that, and then we take some money off the top, and that's profit. For me, that's exactly my first business is too. I was raised by a father mother who ran a business in exactly the same way. And for many, many years, I was always taught that's the fundamentals of business 101, make more money than you spend. And it's only later, similar to you, getting involved in the startup world and then finding out about, investments and equity and all that, and then being like, whoa, what's all this? That I realized there was something else to be done there. So similar, but definitely not with as many wins under my belt by the sounds of it as you. But still, but the reason why I mention that is because of, do you think that there's I think I know my answer to this, but do you think that there's something to be said for going through that experience, given the fact that there are a lot of first-time, fairly young founders whose first foray into becoming an entrepreneur or business owner is just expecting that someone's going to give them a shit ton of money to go and start their business? Is that setting them up for success without that level of history necessarily, and understanding that some of the fundamentals maybe of what it takes to build a business with your own bare hands? Are we setting them up for failure?
Well, I think the answer is complicated. Firstly, if you think back in the old days, there was no such thing as angel investment or SEIS, and you paid fortunes to lawyers, and investors were white or grey-haired males, white males. So things are a lot more democratized. As a student or as someone having an idea, the ability to turn that idea into reality with less regard to class, race, gender than has been in the past is fantastic. Those biases are still there, but it's dramatically different to the old days, and that's to be applauded. However, I think people often drink too much of that sort of tech crunch Kool-Aid, and you see companies raising large amounts. And, if you think about growing the business, there's the organic growing of the business, the organic rate, which is you get some revenue, you hire people based on the revenue you've got. Initially, you need to prime the pump a bit, so you have to raise some money or put some money into yourself, but you don't grow faster than your revenue allows. And of course, you have to do some CapEx, some development at the beginning. But that gives you a business that grows fairly slowly, which is great for the team, but a bad bet for an investor. An investor isn't interested in a business that's growing slowly. They call it a hobby business, which is a bit of a denigrating term. But it means that, if the founders sell the business for £20 million and get 10 million each, that's awesome. But for an investor, it's a terrible investment. So what investors want is a business that's growing on steroids. But to do that, they pump in large amounts of money so that you can grow faster than your revenue allows, which then puts you on this bandwidth, on the treadmill, the band that's running. And if you don't raise more before you run out, you're dead. And the investor's often telling you, perversely, forget about getting to profitability, grow faster and own the market. So your investor, VC typically, is egging you on for growth at all costs. But when the music stops, which it did in 2022 with fundraising valuations down, and there isn't more money available, then the companies that were doing that then are out of business. And the ones that have been growing more slowly and often, embarrassed by the huge amounts being raised by others and the valuations of others are now going, well, building a proper business was a good thing to do. Yep. So the pendulum swings. But I think ironically, it's investors and VCs who make a return on capital, not if the company grows 3x, but if the company grows 30x. So for the investor, and this is what many founders don't realize, that the motivation of the founder and investor are often fundamentally different. I mean, they both want, a successful exit, but for a founder, an exit of 20 million is amazing. You get home to your spouse, you go, honey, sold the business, we've got 10 million. Your spouse is going to go, that is awesome. Right. You tell your VC investor you've sold the business for 10 million, the VC is going to write it off as a loss because they invested based on the basis that VCs, the way they work is they raise a fund, £100 million, and they're going to invest in 10 or 20 companies with that. And each investment gets them 10% or thereabouts, or maybe of the company, and they get diluted as the company grows. So they are investing, they know that of the 10 investments they make, 5 of them will lose money completely or return less than their investment. 2 or 3 of them will return 3 or 5 times the investment, and 1 of them or 2 of them will return 30 or 50 times. And it's called returning the fund. So VCs invest each investment as if it's going to return 30 to 50x. So for the VC, the fund that's investing, it's like playing a game of roulette. They're putting everything on 26, and if it comes in, it's great. But for you as the founder, it's no good to go, well, honey, we've got a 1 in 100 chance of being a unicorn and a 99% chance of being a failure. Your spouse is going to go, dude, get a proper job.
Right.
Whereas, so for you as a founder, you want a good chance of a modest exit, and for a fund, they want a small chance, well, a bigger chance, but they know it's a smaller chance of a much bigger exit. And that perversely drives the industry. But you might say that actually it's a good thing, because even though a lot of companies might get pushed and go out of business, society as a whole, the world changes from the ones who take the bigger risks and change everything. I'm not making a sweeping, value statement about humanity and so on right there, but it may well be the case that that model actually for changing things is more effective than lots and lots of cheese shops.
Yeah, it's tough to know for certain, really. I mean, the phrase "slow and steady wins the race" comes to mind. But
that line was written by the tortoise.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, I think there's credence to both, but yeah, and then I suppose the other compounding factor, the one that concerns me the most, and the one that with my clients as a mentor and advisor, I see sort of happen the most in these situations, is the speed in which an organization has to grow. And like I said, you're typically talking about founders who have not sometimes even managed people before, let alone run a company.
Yeah.
And they're suddenly put in a position where they have to grow incredibly fast over a very short period of time. And they haven't got time to learn the lessons that you learn when these things go fairly organically, to be a good leader, to understand that their position needs to change quite considerably from them and a couple of people in a shed, to suddenly being thrust into this very essentially being a figurehead for an organization, primarily dealing with investor relations and board meetings and so on. And so inevitably you end up with a very serious set of culture shocks. It's not even one culture shock, it's usually a set of culture shocks in quick succession, which usually it completely alienates the founder and makes them feel very bitter about the whole situation, and inevitably puts them in a position where they're probably not that great at the job anymore. And I feel like that is probably the biggest sort of crime that gets committed more often than not in that situation, when you see these incredibly enthusiastic, very innovative, very creative individuals sort of crushed under the weight of their own creation to some extent. I find that to be a very difficult pill to swallow when I see it. But I suppose the solution is to work with people like me and other resources that are out there, maybe provided by VCs and so on, to mitigate that as best as possible, right?
I think there's exactly the challenge, which is, as a founder, you're often an introvert, and you have found some problem, and maybe, you're a software developer, or you're a doctor or whatever, and, mother dialysis machine, something, found problem, have solution, diligently work on it, and then you start pitching it, and then you get some investment, and then now you're the CEO, and this is all outside of your comfort zone, and you're learning on the job. And initially there are 5 or 6 people, and and then one day there's like 60 people or 200 people, and your role has changed completely from, doing everything yourself to now building the team and managing people. And so the question is, how do you reinvent yourself? And by the way, I don't claim for myself as a success. My team will probably say I'm a micromanager and so on. I love the product side of things, but you have to do more of the people side of things. So can you reinvent yourself? And if you can't, then can you surround yourself with people who will, take care of the things that are not your forte? So maybe you think in a company, there are three sort of key roles. There is the domain expert, the hustler, the person with the idea, the person who's going to win customers, and so on, and create the innovative product. There is a person who's going to help deliver it, often the CTO in a company, or the product person. It may not have been their idea, but they know how to execute the technical implementation. And then the last role is the Mr. or Ms. Money, the person who's going to help get it funded, make it a proper business. And that aligns with a CFO or COO role. So I think as the founder, look within and see which one or more of these am I, and then surround yourself with others. And then, think about how you reinvent yourself. Maybe you maybe read books, maybe you get coaching, but, it's that reinvention, which I think is interesting. By the way, on the slow and steady, you got me thinking, which is slow and steady wins the race, but the flashy one running up front is the one winning the sponsorship dollars.
Right, because everyone's going to think, yeah, this is the one. Yeah, it's a betting game. It's right, well, this guy's run 10 out of 10 races, so.
Well, this is the one with the lycra shorts jumping up and down, going, yay, even though they go around the corner and then run out of energy and stop while the tortoise goes along. But that's the one with the sponsorship dollars. And there's the tragedy or the irony of it. Or how do you, as the founder, leverage that? Because the reality is, if your startup's super boring, you're going to miss out on the PR. So how do you come up with some shtick that gets you the PR? And the PR means you have to spend a lot less money on paid advertising. So what is it that helps you stick out and have a flashy business as far as the press is concerned, but a proper business with, great customer-centric solutions as far as your customers are concerned? And maybe that's the goal.
Yeah, and some businesses that are quote unquote boring businesses don't need to do any of that. They can just make money.
It's outrageous. I mean, I don't know how it works, but
yeah, I've heard about this idea before. It's well, look, I mean, I think it's fair to say we're not the first, and we won't be the last people to talk about these topics, and I don't think there's necessarily any obvious solution to or even to be had. It is kind of just the state of things, and I do hope that the last few years, as we're seeing things kind of come back, will have left a mark to some extent, right? I'm already with some friends of mine, connections within the investment space, fellow investors, I know that they are forming funds as a result,
right?
And ex-founders, ex-operators who, similar to you, maybe gone through the startup ecosystem and you decided, right, okay, this is a problem I saw in the legal side of things. This is now one that everyone has seen very publicly in terms of the investor side of things, and now looking, okay, let's put funds together that do things differently. And so I think that these kinds of disruptions are the very definition of what spurs along change, right? So we should see some change, I think, as a result. How impactful that change is, who knows? But I think it's going to be interesting to see what these newer funds decide to do and how they present themselves and operate. It could be a very interesting thing to watch bear out over the next few years, I think.
Yes, and I think just the statement, I'd like to start a fund, indicates that technology and platforms have also made something dramatically easier, because the statement, I want to start a fund, a decade ago would have been a huge thing to even figure out where to do it.
Right.
Now you can start a fund much more easily. It's still quite expensive to start a fund. So what a lot of people call me and go, Anthony, I want to start a fund, and I explain what needs to be done, at the end of which they go, I'm just going to create a syndicate.
Right.
So a syndicate is where you just get together with some other investors. There's no FCA authorized thing that needs to be set up and £100,000 of legals. You just get on SeedLegals and you create a syndicate. And and a group of people get together, and the person who organizes the syndicate can get a carry, which means a share of the profit on a sale of the shares later, and the whole thing can be done in minutes. So the fact that you can now go, I would like to create a syndicate, and you can push some buttons and do it, I think is marvelous. And that's the next thing to change, which is investors getting together as syndicates. And syndicates, it turns out, are all powered by WhatsApp groups. So investors getting together, talking on WhatsApp, somebody suggests this company is going to invest in, they're all going to get their SEIS or EIS tax benefits, and that fuels the UK startup economy. So the more you can, make that an easy thing to do and spread the knowledge that you can do this, the better it is for everyone. And I think what's really interesting is, angel investors are looking for a different return on investment than a VC, and one that aligns much more with the founder. So a VC might do, 30 or 50 investments. So they are looking for that game of roulette, where one of them is the big winner and returns the fund. But angel investors, people investing personally, are probably only going to do a few investments a year. So for them, a 1 in 20 chance of it being a huge winner isn't helpful, because they're probably going to lose all their money in the short term and then in the midterm. So whereas for an angel investor, a 3 to 5 times return on investment with no capital gains tax from their SEIS is a great outcome. And you're just going to rinse and repeat and do it again. So that aligns very much with what the founder wants. So the enablement of angel investment, I think, really helps founders and I think we will see an increase in micro exits. Founders selling for 20 million rather than hanging in there and raising huge amounts to try and get to that unicorn, which they keep reading about on TechCrunch, which actually, for most intents and purposes, is a poor metric and a poor thing to aim for.
Yeah, and you've mentioned that a couple of times now, and I know you've posted about that on quite a few occasions online too. So this is clearly something quite close to your heart. What's kind of led you to that, aside from the obvious, to do with what you've pointed out about the fallacy or the risks associated with going for those larger unicorn kind of aims? What else has contributed to that, maybe throughout your experience in being a founder? I mean, is it because you yourself have had those exits and seen the sort of, I mean, presumably you must have, right, over that 5-year period, like you said, that they did quite, fast sort of going to market and going to exit. So is that what you think is contributing to you encouraging others to maybe?
Yeah, it's a great point. That's definitely one thing. The other one is I see lots of companies and the journeys they go through. The other thing I see, at SeedLegals, we've actually been very disciplined. We're 160 people, and over the life of the company, we've raised a total of £4 million, and we've been roughly cash flow break even for years, and have grown somewhat organically. But I sort of slightly enviously see companies raising large amounts and growing very quickly, and sometimes it doesn't end well, and sometimes you see they've raised large amounts and they've got no more traffic than you've got. Right. So I've seen that that may not be the best way to do things. The other thing is, if you grow very quickly, you grow faster than your headspace for using those resources wisely, and you start spinning up all sorts of things, and people building data warehouses and doing this and B2B and B2C, and at the end of it you've wasted a lot of money because you've built more things than you could sensibly strategically figure out.
The lack of resources and creativity and innovation, there seems to be a very interesting kind of relationship between when you don't give someone an enormous amount to play with, what they're able to come up with, with little to few resources. Well, I mean, so in terms of the SeedLegals, then I know we're kind of dying all over the place, but that's what I do, so apologies. But so with SeedLegals, you met your co-founder, and what was it at that lunch specifically that, I mean, he was obviously bonded over maybe shared experiences in this space to do with the dealings of lawyers and so on. But what specific, was there a sort of a moment, a thing that was said any particular time that just made you both go, we should do this? Like, and if so, what was that?
Yeah, I thought you were going to say you bonded over sherry, but you bonded over shared experiences.
And potentially sherry too. I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming this is in Italy, so maybe just a really good red,
exactly.
a full-bodied red, maybe. Yeah.
Exactly. So Laurent was saying that, as an investor, he found that lawyers were slow, they made mistakes, they charged a fortune. Every funding round had different legals. It drove him crazy. And I, having sold my last startup and was wondering what to do, and I invested in a few. And actually, one of the ones I invested was 3 students. And actually, I'd wanted to hire one of the students previously as a developer, but he wanted to finish his degree. And afterwards, he emailed me saying, "I've got this idea. Can you look over my pitch deck?" And I said, "Sure, send it over." And I wrote back saying, "Your pitch deck's not really great, but I love the idea. I tell you what, I'll invest." It was only going to be £20,000. So we're not going to pay a lawyer. I will do the legals for you. And I basically took the funding agreements from my last startup and sort of crossed out the one word and put in the new word. And I figured I'd give it a go. And I made 2 assumptions. Well, because I was going to be the judge, jury, and executioner, in other words, I'm the investor, and I know what I'm talking about, I will explain everything to them. So I got together with these 3 students and went through all the funding docs. And I had, 2 assumptions. 1, I would know what I was talking about. And 2, they would find the entire thing completely boring and want to take no more than 5 minutes. But it turned out they were supremely interested in it, in every detail. It turned out there was a lot of stuff I didn't know. There was frantic Googling for what all these terms meant. And I also saw that I was actually quite good at explaining stuff in a way that, none experts in that field would understand. And in the event, I realized I did a much poorer deal for myself than I could have had I known what I know now. But
and then suddenly you realize why solicitors charge as much as they do, perhaps.
Well, yes, except that actually all of that is completely productizable with hint text, data, and video to go, all of these variables, for every single early stage funding round, they're pretty much identical. Companies will have a different valuation, but everyone's got 75% drag along provisions. Half of companies got investor consent and half not. This is the thing that will show you when you want it or not. So all the indecisions actually turn out to be a fairly standard pattern. And depending on the stage of your business, the variables are different, but remarkably self-similar in any particular stage, because the funding round is a set of checks and balances to protect the interests of the investors and the founders. And you want to make sure they don't become too investor friendly, in which case you might get stuck trying to run your own business or get fired. And if they're too founder friendly, the investor finds themselves out of money because you just decide to close your business or you sell it for £12 to a friend and start a new business. So the whole point is to create the right set of checks and balances. But so anyway, after explaining this to these students, I realized these things and then thought no more about it until I met with Laurent. Then it all came back to me. I thought, that's really interesting. I've gone through this. Maybe we can turn this into something that is scalable. And so we set to work doing it. In the UK, the funding documents are an industry standard called the BVCA, the British Venture Capital Association, who England's a leader in the space in the standardization of things that have been otherwise very different. And then what we could do is take these standard documents and automate them by giving people the data to show what things to choose and reducing it to a set of deal terms. And then the computer would build the legals, but importantly, you wouldn't have to read, 100 pages of legalese to try to figure out what you're signing. You could see in plain English, I want this term and I want 3 directors, and John can appoint the first director and Alice can appoint the second. And then the legals will reflect what in plain English you wanted to agree. And I realized that educating the founder and indeed the investor was super important, particularly the founder, because there's often an information asymmetry. If you're going to a fund, they've done this before, you haven't. So you think you need to go to a lawyer, but actually what you really wanted is to learn what's market standard, what the key deal terms are. And it doesn't need a lawyer. In fact, a lawyer is the less good one to tell you than a fellow founder and the content that's been created around it. And of course, once you reach scale, then you've got data as well. It's because one of the challenges founders have is they go, why does the investor want that? Am I the only idiot in the world who's going to agree to that draconian term? Or am I the only idiot in the world to push back on it and it's completely standard? So how do you know what things you should reasonably push back on or not? And your lawyer is probably going to do one funding round every several months, but a platform is doing several funding rounds per day. So if you can leverage the data, you have a much better result to show you. And I mean, ultimately, you are going to haggle, but you're going to settle at some point, and where you settle is generally the same point. So you want to get the most efficient way to get there.
And this is how SeedLegals started, essentially, right? It was focused on essentially allowing founders to create these documents that are by entering the bespoke information, and then you would get the full legal document out of it. And I remember that. My first use of it, that was at the time, going back, I can't remember exactly when, a couple of years ago, that was pretty much the main functionality of the platform at the time. So at what point did it become obvious that there were other things that you could do? Because now, like to your point about syndicates and SCIS and EAS and a few other things, what point did those elements start coming in, and what was the motivation behind adding those elements?
Yeah, that's a great point. So, if you're looking to grow your business, the question is, how do you grow your business? You can have more features and products and things to sell to your current customer base. You can grow into adjacent spaces, SMEs. You can go into other countries. So I think the first thing is, as people began using our platform and they went, oh, can we have one of these as well? Or we'd identified some trend. And I think identifying a trend is one of the things that I love, because when you create a new business in someone else's space, right, some law firms are the incumbent, initially you're feeling sort of a bit embarrassed that you're trying to do things differently and you're trying to reflect what's market standard. But after you get some adoption, you can be a bit more ballsy about the whole thing, and you can say, we are making what's market. And I think one of the things I love most is what I call the trend to agile fundraising, which we we coined the term and somewhat made it a thing, and it's completely transformed the way UK companies raise investment. So once upon a time, you had to aim to do a funding round. The only thing you would know is I have to do a funding round. But these days, 70% of all investment is raised not in a funding round. It's raised before a funding round or topping up a funding round. And the funding round itself is not exactly a dinosaur. It's still the aspiration. But it's, instead of going, I need to raise £500,000, I need to find all these investors, and, it's going to take me 4 months to do that. You can meet someone at a party and go, can I invest in your business? And you go, great, let me send you a seed fast this evening. So companies are raising piece by piece ahead of a round, and then because valuations are down, it often doesn't make sense to do a big funding round again, but you might top up your last round. So you can create new concepts and give them a name, and I really love doing that. But also, of course, as Reid Hoffman said, first build utility, don't get ahead of yourself, and then build a network. So if you've got some 30% or 50% of startups on your platform, and you've got 25% of all angel investors on your platform, how can you leverage the network effect on that? So our goal now is to create SeedLegals for investors, and then create deal flow. So as an investor, you can get together and you can find companies, and we'll do things like use AI to analyze a pitch deck to connect with investors that are interested and do really interesting things there. So for a founder, hopefully it will bring you investment to make it easier to find investors. And for investors, hopefully it will give you a nice place to find a great set of startups that fit you. And of course, everything gets completed in one place, in one platform, on deal terms. These are the terms that I like. Maybe one day the AI will tell you, hey, Greg, the difference between these terms and the ones you like, or these are the three differences, and here's how you might, look to argue for those, whatever it might be. I'm getting ahead of myself, but
yeah, no, I can see that.
A friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps the show and only takes a couple of minutes.
Essentially making the AI, the SeedLegals AI, something of an associate or an investment assistant or something like that would be an incredibly valuable thing, for sure.
Exactly. You're going to wake up in the morning and go, I bought what? No.
Yeah, what did you do? Yeah. Where's all my money gone? Yeah.
Good morning, Anthony. I've invested in tobacco. It's like, whoa.
What? It's been illegal for 5 years. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing where you're positioned and the things we're going for. Let me ask you maybe a question that some people who are listening and watching might find an incredibly boring to hear the answer, but I have a feeling that the vast majority will really appreciate you answering, which is, can you explain what SEIS and EIS is for those listening? Because again, I think we get on this show quite a lot of first-time founders and entrepreneurs, as well as more seasoned ones. So it could be quite interesting for them.
That is a great point. And there was some stat that said only 3% of people know what it means now.
Right.
So, if you're an investor and you want to invest in a startup, we all know investing in a startup is risky. There's a good chance you'll lose your money. So the UK government has got this fantastic tax initiative for angel investors. An angel investor is somebody who invests personally as opposed to a fund or a company. So if you're investing directly in a company, you can deduct from your income tax from this tax year or the tax year of your investment or the previous tax year. You can backdate it 50% of the amount that you've invested. So if you're investing £50,000 in a company, you can take £25,000 off your taxable income with this SEIS, Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, to promote investment in early stage startups. And if you keep your shares for 3 years and sell them after 3 years, you pay no capital gains tax, which is amazing. And if the company doesn't work out and it closes down, you can then write off the loss from your income tax as well. So it overall de-risks it. It's said that the risk overall is something like 13 pence in the pound or something like that. And so these tax benefits fuel the early stage UK startup fundraising ecosystem. And I'd say that for funding rounds of raising less than £500,000, I'd say that 80% of all investment is angel investors, people investing personally, investing in companies where they can get these tax deductions. For the company, you have to do a bit of work to fill in the paperwork and apply to HMRC. You can get what's called advance assurance. So you write to HMRC beforehand, giving them particulars about your company, and they write back saying your company will qualify. And now you can tell investors, we can offer you these SEIS tax breaks. And after the investment, you do what's called SEIS compliance, which gives them this magic number that they can then use when they do their tax return to claim their tax deduction. And this makes being able to tell investors, I offer you SEIS. There's a big brother version of it called EIS that's slightly less generous, but companies can raise more that way and investors can invest more that way. So that's for slightly later stage companies, is often the difference. If you can tell your investor that you can offer SEIS, between the investor going, I'm in, versus call me when you can offer SEIS. So it's definitely worth doing. And HMRC published stats on how many people apply and so on. And we offer this as a service on SeedLegals, where we check the pitch deck, we check that it's going to be eligible and so on. HMRC stats say something like 67% get approved, and on SeedLegals it's 98%. But we see that 51% of all of these go through SeedLegals. So what's fantastic is, we've got early insight really as a leading indicator as well of how many people are planning funding rounds, because you apply as a company for this before you go fundraising. So you have this in place so when you talk to investors. So if we see an uptick in applications, it means a few months later there's like to be an uptick in funding rounds and vice versa. So it gives us great data on this. But for an investor, when you're looking to invest, if you've got the magic 4 letters, SEIS or EIS, that a company's offering, it means that there's going to be a fantastic tax deduction that makes the whole thing much more attractive and de-risks it if things don't go right.
Yeah, and it's certainly a prerequisite for any investments that I look at, and I don't know a single angel investor in my network that would even consider an investment without it these days. For sure. And you're an angel investor as well now, right?
Well, so these days I don't invest because it creates too much conflict of interest with SeedLegals. The problem is, for those who know, yes, Prime Minister, you get thrust into what I call the moral dimension, or they call the moral dimension. So, at SeedLegals, my goal is to be awesome to everybody. And I can't really go, yes, we'd love to do your funding round, but, I'm not going to invest. So I solved this problem by just going, sorry, I just don't invest these days so that I can be awesome to everybody without going, yes, but not you. So
right.
And otherwise also just, there's so many people who ask that it just takes so much time. So the answer is no, one day, yes, but not now. So yeah.
Yes. And yeah, tell me about it. Yeah, it's the reason why I took a break. So yeah, and on that note, I mean, I mentioned to you before, I've pointed people in your direction for a long time now. It's fine. Off air we can talk about how the shares you're going to give me and the commission, but but there's a reason for that, and it's because I think how concisely, like you just did there, and thank you for explaining that. How concisely you explain these things. To your point about maybe when you were working with those students, the realization that you have that ability to explain some pretty complex things very concisely and in a way in which others can understand. And I think that there's something about that skill set. I've sort of over the years called it the teacher skill set, right? Which I think is hugely valued in this space, or any space which tends to be overly complex or convoluted sometimes, for individuals to come out and do that and then productize it and make it more digestible. And so I think it's a hugely important contribution that you and SeedLegals are making to the world, the entrepreneurial landscape, to the startup ecosystem in this country and now seemingly in other countries. So I applaud you for that. And I know a lot of founders that are very grateful for what you've done to reshape the landscape in that way. So, just giving you your flowers there.
That's very kind. Thank you. I must say, I really love the task of, there is a lot of complicated information. You're looking for an answer, and how do you analyze it to figure out what is the answer for you. I also joke, what would a law firm do? And then I'll do completely the opposite, which is, the law firm in this space would give you 12 things you could do with the risk analysis on each. And my goal would be to give you data and go, for your size company, this is going to be the one that everyone goes for. And if you go for this, it's going to work and it's going to be easy. You can choose other things, but this is one you probably want.
Right.
So I get a kick out of trying to figure out what the simple answer is to a set of multiple different variables, and then try and scale it so that it can help everyone. I mean, it's not always possible to do, but for a large class of things, it's possible to do.
Sure. And I think ultimately the reason why this aligns so much with and resonates with me and why I was so keen to talk to you is because I'm essentially trying to do the same thing with the founders I work with, but more on the commercial side of things, where I strongly believe that there are a huge amount of entities and individuals within the space talking about sales, marketing, branding, customer success, and product and all that kind of stuff, that fits under the sort of commercial banner, that are making it more and more of a headache to understand how to go to market, how to define your messaging, and how to really understand your value propositions, and how to just make sales, and those kinds of things. And I think that that this is something that a couple of years ago really spurred me on to kind of rebrand myself as the no bullshit commercial advisor, because I just feel like there is too much bullshit. Like because there's so many people whose interests lie primarily in just getting paid.
Right.
That the advice they're going to give you isn't necessarily going to be 100% conducive to the simplest answer, because they want to create some level of confusion to justify their existence as an expert. And like, I'm coming along, like I think now more others are also in this space, to say, we don't claim to be experts, but I can maybe help you see the forest for the trees and find a simple, for your very specific circumstance, like you were just saying, there is probably a simple set of solutions to it to focus on, at least for right now, right? That actually there are just some steps that you can make right now to make some progress. Don't worry about all of this other stuff. That can come later. Maybe have it in the back of your mind, but you can't think of everything and you can't do it all. And I think that's a really needed thing, because of the other major thing is, yes, you can get the legal side, you can get the investment side, but then you need to sell it. and
Exactly.
No one is talking about that in a way that I feel is comfortable. But everyone makes it out like sales is this or marketing is this incredibly scientific, complex thing that a guru must hold the answer to. And for non-salesy founders, that's
Yes,
it's bewildering,
and that's hugely valuable, because founders, and sometimes they come from a sales background, but in many cases, again, it's as I said earlier, it's the doctor inventing something new,
right,
or some fintech or a program, and they're almost embarrassed initially to sell, because they think it's some sort of venal act.
Right,
People
and this
give
is
me
the
money.
problem.
No, this is the noble thing of building but if you don't sell, then you're out of business. But I think it would probably be the case that 80% of all startups fit into one of 5 or 6 different categories. This is B2B, SaaS. This is a business to consumer online service. This is a physical goods thing. And each of them will have their own formula, but the formula for a given one of these buckets will probably be quite similar. And once you've figured out what that is, which bucket the company's in, there's probably a fairly standard formula. So you're going to do your lead gen on LinkedIn. You're going to use the following 4-step process to find leads and turn leads into customers. LinkedIn is going to be one part of a 5-step process for lead gen. The others are going to be content marketing, SEO, whatever. Don't spend all your money on Google Pay PPC ads, because you're going to run out of money. Do buy some PPC ads to test what works and look at what your competitors are doing. So there's probably a fairly standard playbook for each of a few segments. And yes, you're going to find somebody who's delivering fertilizer by drone or something that doesn't quite fit any of these playbooks, but that's okay. You can solve the 80% use case super easily. Anyway, that end many rants on productizing other spaces, but but
yeah, you're absolutely right. And then I think on top of that, the bigger problem that I'm seeing really founders struggle with is they may know all of that, and they may know that, but they just don't know how to start. And really what that seems to come down to is similar to what you mentioned earlier about SeedLegals actually as a whole, which is in terms of the fact the way you approached it was the ideal. Find utility first, and you did that by being very hyper focused on, okay, well, this is our core customer and this is the core product we're offering. But presumably you still need to find a very specific set of words that get that across, right? That this is what we do. All too often, founders seem to be trying to sell the whole thing, that the whole idea of what it's going to be in 10 years, as opposed to what it is just right now. And this is where I come back to, not seeing the forest for the trees sometimes is founders are very innovative, imaginative, and creative people. And so they can kind of get very caught up in that sometimes. And sometimes it takes someone to just go, oh, okay, well, wait, calm down. You've got this thing right now, and that's what you need to sell. So tell people you've got this thing and who it's for. That's it.
I think the challenge is that investors want to hear a slightly different, bigger picture message,
Right.
and that screws up the messaging that the founders had. So, what I would
Very good
urge you
point. Yeah.
to do is, as a founder, think about two separate messages. For your customers, your customer doesn't want to know that you use big data or that you have an expansion plan that
Right.
leverages their data or whatever it might be. They just want to know, I've got a problem to solve and you solve this problem.
And do you understand my problem?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to your site and whatever, and you're just going to, whatever I need, you're going to do super easily at a low cost. For an investor, they're looking for a different message, because for them, it's like, that's awesome, but it's probably not going to be a huge market. Yeah,
Right.
you know, it needs to be $1 trillion market, or we're not interested in some bullshit that investors give. So for an investor, you need to sex it up, not in a way that's misleading or wrong, but you want to paint a much bigger, longer term vision of, first we're going to do this, then we're going to be in these countries, then we're going to do this, and so on. So you're going to show the investor that huge extra market. But what you must carefully do is make sure your team is laser focused on delivering the customer experience now, that utility, while showing the investor the roadmap that this is just phase one. We've got phase 2 and 3 as we change and transform everything and use AI or whatever. But do not go build the B2B, B2C data warehouse thing all simultaneously, because you're going to run out of money before you've proved the point. And you're also going to be hedging your bets by, instead of putting everything on something for your target market, you're going to be thinking, well, if that doesn't work on consumer market, we're going to do B2B. So you keep moving things around. So
and you confuse your current customers. They don't know what you are. They don't know if they should root
exactly.
for you.
And your website now starts having, you know, B2B and B2C, as opposed to just going, if you've got X, you're looking for X, come here and click this button and we'll do it for you.
Right.
So understanding in your mind the two messages: for customers, just solve my problem; for investors, I'm doing that right now so that I'm not, you're going to keep losing all your money building stuff that maybe one day will work. No, I'm going to have a proposition that's revenue generating really quickly, but it's more than that. It is this long-term plan as well. And I think that understanding and keeping those as two separate things in your mind, your software team may only need to know about one of them, and your investors need to know about both of them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And then I suppose there's also that vision that needs to be communicated to the team, like you say, which is you want them to understand both sides of that, because you want them to be aiming for the stars, you know, with the vision that you're selling to the investors. But you need to, like you say, keep them focused on the here and now. I think that a lot of aspiring founders, let's say, and entrepreneurs that you probably have encountered as well, that they're determined to build that final vision, it seems, and so they need to be reined in sometimes to just go, whoa, you know, slow. That's kind of what I meant. You know, it's like, what is the one thing you can execute on now and deliver now? And you know, that those individuals who haven't built anything yet, who have an idea, quite often that's the thing that needs to be reined in. I've found is, you know, they want to build Amazon before building a bookshelf, you know, and it's like one step at a time. You know, sell some books first, you know, like, you know, you don't go straight to building a BBC iPlayer. You have to have a broadcasting network station first, you know.
Yes, I think what happens is the founder excitedly tells their developer team the way they're going to change the world, and they explain this big vision, and the developer team goes, oh my God, I've no idea where to get started. Number one. Number two, there are going to be millions of users, so I have to build this hugely complicated AWS multi-zone, multi-hosted system with databases and failover for millions of users. And so by showing this big picture plan, I mean, it has some use, but it has a lot of negativity, because the developers start building for a future that you have no idea that you're actually going to be able to deliver. Right. And instead of the developers going, great, we're building for 1 million users, they then spend months creating complicated architectures, which will become completely redundant because it turn out the platform pivots and is something else. Instead of going, guys or gals, we want to launch next week a service that works for 2 users.
Right.
And when we have 2 happy users, we'll make it work for 10 users, and then we'll keep going from there. So your goal is to get the simplest product for a paying customer as soon as possible, and then iterate from there.
Yeah, good advice. Very good advice. And yeah, one that I think applies to most, not all, but most situations, right? Like you said, there are outliers.
If you're building a nuclear power station, I would probably err towards maybe more of the safety side and not just ship it and see if it works.
Exactly. Yeah. You can't if you wanted to build yeah. I mean, it's definitely the case with actual products, right? It's a bit of a different story, I mean, you would build maybe a prototype to raise funding and so on, but at the end of the day, the finished product needs people's expectations for certain things in certain areas are very different. And yeah, when it comes to safety, you're not going to say we'll build half a power station.
What you could do, I mean, a perfect example was SeedLegals, where when we got started, building the whole platform automation was quite complicated. So I couldn't go, you've got like beta versions of your legal docs. The legals had to be good, but they didn't have to be machine generated. So what we did was, when we started, we created the website with the forms where you fill in the details for the key terms, and then the platform was not rendering the documents because it didn't work. So then our legal team would create a Word doc version. So the customer got exactly the high quality output, but it was the fake it till you make it. So the team were doing it. And then when the team started screaming, "Help, Anthony, you're killing us, we can't take it anymore," then we would have to, okay, great, let's just automate it. But this was a really good thing to do, because what happens is we thought people are going to need all these deal terms that they're going to negotiate on. It turns out they only needed half the ones we thought about, but then another half of the ones we never thought about. So if we built everything, we'd have spent all this time building something, and then people wouldn't have used it. But by getting a simpler, narrower product to market first, we just started with these are the small set of deal terms we think people really will need. And when people tell us there's one we couldn't support, we'll go add that. So what you want to do, I think, is get a high quality but narrowly focused product to market, and then iterate from there. And it may turn out you can only deal with 10% of customers. You can satisfy them. That's great. You got there 10% faster than 0%, while you waited. So, and then you want to make sure that those customers, even if you have to do it manually, have a great experience, but then leverage everything you do manually to automate it. So the next time, that will be an automated solution. And hopefully pretty soon it converges so that, 80% of customers have an automated solution. And then you can figure out the remaining 20%. You might actually be better off saying, sorry, we can't help you. Go to a competitor, or the old way of doing things, rather than trying to chase the remaining ones, which might be a diminished return, or maybe they're just never going to fit your model. So saying no is actually quite useful as well, even though it pains you greatly. So
and especially early on, because like you said, if you need to stay that narrowly focused, then you need to be very honest about who I can and cannot serve. And if you encounter individuals that are saying, "Oh, can I do this? Can I do that?" Don't try and bend over backwards for everyone, because otherwise you'll end up, like you said, just losing that focus. So
exactly. I think on the flip side, if you're saying no to 90% of customers, you've got a substantial problem, because you've got a very small, narrow business. So,
yeah. There needs to be a certain amount of logic applied there, for sure. But so when you built that sort of the initial iteration of the platform, then how did you get it in front of people? What was your process to do that? So you had this platform, people could enter their information, and then on the back end you were manually creating these at that time. But how did you even get people to interact with it?
How did I find customers is the question. I totally don't remember, but I think you have to go out and make as much noise as possible. So, our office was in a workspace, so there was a big lobby and people having coffee, and I'd go around and, personally, you have to be a bit shameless as a founder, go, "Hey, can I talk to you about the startup I'm building? If you are you looking to do a funding round? No, great. Thanks for talking. You're looking to do a funding round? Great. How far are you? And can we help you with this?" And then pretty soon, you find a couple, and then other people have seen you working the floor, so to speak, and then they tell their friends, or they come and knock on your door. Hey, Anthony, I saw you. You came to talk about a funding round. And so maybe 6 months go by, maybe 2 years go by, and people get back to you. So you want to make as much noise as possible. The other problem you've got, particularly in our space, is the trust problem. Like, hey, Anthony, it looks interesting. You seem very nice, but how do I know this platform is going to work? So then that's the one to get over as well.
Well, how did you overcome that? Was it because you were able to say, well, we have a team of lawyers that are, was that the solution, or was there some other way of doing that?
Yeah, you have to explain that to probably the legal team that you're doing it manually, and you'll make sure that it works, and you'll personally check it and so on.
Right.
And then you can hopefully start pointing to a couple of success ones, and then, it becomes, how many customers do you have? 3. Isn't a good number, and then you hope it to get to 10 and then 50 and so on, and then you work your way through that. And I think that's a common problem in many spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why often in the beginning it's the case of like, let me just do this for you, no charge. Let's just see how it goes. You know what I mean? And you need to start. Yeah, you need to see. Yeah, not only from your own end, we just need to see how this works, but also when the word's out there, oh, these guys deliver a great service or a great product, then you have something to hang your hat on a little bit and make movement on. So yeah, well, there was one last thing I wanted to ask you about before I let you go, because I find it very interesting what you said as well about your own opinion on this, but also about the platform and how it ties in, which is syndicates. What in your view, well, you did touch on this, but what in your view is so beneficial around angels looking to take part in a syndicate, but also from a founder perspective, looking to seek out maybe investment from syndicates, because it is something that is on the rise, like you mentioned, and you guys are playing a pivotal role in that. So what's your thoughts there?
I think, the goal is, from the founder perspective, finding investors is difficult. But what if your investor could find investors for you? And that's really what a syndicate is. And the syndicate is, an investor gets their WhatsApp group together, finds companies to invest in, finds other people to co-invest with them, and then can get a carry, which incentivizes them. They get some money back, as a profit if they want to, on the sale of the shares later. So if you could leverage your investor to find other investors, that's going to be helpful. And likewise, as an investor, you might want to invest in companies, but it makes more sense to invest a small amount in 10 companies than a big amount in one company. So how can you get together with other investors to make more investments overall, where you have a smaller part of it? And then you've got the hive mind of other investors, that brains trust to go, which one should we invest in? Get over this person knows all about this market, this person knows about that market. So collectively you can make better decisions, and that's exactly where syndicates come in. So I think it'll be, I don't know if it's going to remain niche, because the vast majority of founders go out and find investors directly. I don't know if this will be the start of something. It's become more fashionable, but I think it's still very much a minor thing, the syndicates. It'd be interesting to see how that evolves. And it may turn out that a good fraction of investing is investors getting together and sort of hunting as a group, and it becomes a new thing.
Sure. I mean, and I guess would it be fair to say that the one among maybe many barriers, but the one obvious barrier there that might potentially slow it down is because everyone has to agree within that syndicate as to who is getting the funds, that can potentially cause issues, right? If you don't have angels together who are aligned on the types of things that they want to invest in, or what they deem as being a good-looking product or an investable founder, that's probably the only downside. Versus, of course, a fund where the LPs don't need to give sign-off necessarily to every single thing, as long as it's within the thesis. So, would that be a fair sort of observation?
So explain to the viewer, that a fund, the investors in the fund, often called LPs, limited partners,
Sure, thank you. I didn't explain that.
give their money to the fund, and the fund decides who to invest in. With a syndicate, there is no central fund. You get together with other investors and you have a brainstorm. Hey, let's invest in this company. And then some of you might go, well, not me today, I'm out, or I don't have any money this month. And but a well-functioning syndicate, I suppose, might have 50 people in the group, of which 10 of them on any given deal will invest. And so it's a sort of a brains trust, and it doesn't mean all people in the syndicate will always invest. It might turn out some of them go, yeah, I love this business, and others say, not me, but there are enough of them getting together. And so often the syndicate investors might be doing £10,000 investment in a deal each, and the syndicate as a whole is coming in for £100,000 or £60,000. Those seem to be sort of fairly standard from what we've seen. And one of the other advantages for being part of a syndicate is collectively the members of the syndicate are hunting good deals, whereas for you individually, it's just too painful to find. And of course, once the syndicate gets a name for itself, then founders will start pinging them, so you get more deal flow. And of course, for a founder, finding investment is a necessary evil. Your business isn't going to grow without it, but nobody loves finding investors or investment. Lifestyle things, it needs to be fun. And of course, you want to save the planet and get a return on investment and reduce your income tax with SEIS and so on. But overall, it's a fun thing. And I think the fun thing comes from obviously meeting delightful founders, listening to pitches, helping change the world, and, where relevant, hanging out with other interesting investors and learning as you hear from others, like, oh, I would invest in this one, or, it looks good on paper, but I realize this market segment is really difficult. These are the big players. It's impossible to get through. I've invested in one, it didn't work. So there's a lot of learning to be had, and that's part of the fun of the process as well.
Yeah, I agree. Fun is something that isn't talked about enough in our space, actually. I feel like
exactly.
I've mentioned that on quite a few occasions when I speak to people, like, just have fucking fun. Like, this is meant to be fun. That's the whole reason why we do this. Like, so yeah. Well, look, as we're approaching the last couple of minutes, I just want to sort of throw it to you. I mean, do you have any specific? I mean, I've still got a ton of questions, but it's amazing how quickly the time flies by. But we'll have to do it again if you're up for it at some point in the future. But is there anything that specifically you wanted to talk about? What's going on with SeedLegals in the future, in the pipeline? Anything exciting that's just been announced? Anything you want to highlight, or maybe any questions you have for me? Anything at all that you want to bring to our collective attention?
Nothing particularly, I suppose. No. One of the many things I love at SeedLegals is I speak to large numbers of founders doing unbelievably amazing things. The variation is great, and I really love how we're democratizing fundraising, how we see, companies that do everything from a sourdough bakery to fusion, drones, whatever. And once upon a time, I think that fundraising was very much the preserve of people who were fintech background who could, or MBAs who could go to VCs. And now it's anyone who has an idea who can pitch to, anyone who's an angel investor. And you start by raising a smaller round and then raising a bigger round. You learn how much equity to dilute. There's a formula for it. And, I think that we're very much at the heart of that ecosystem, both in terms of volume, but also in terms of the education. And I really love that. And I love seeing in our Slack channel the unbelievable variety of companies that are fundraising and really tapping into that source of capital to do something that would have been a lot more difficult, were it not for that as a possibility.
And look, it's exactly that philosophy that you've just shared is the reason why I recommend you guys the way I do, and I will continue to, because I think your intentions are absolutely in the right place, and just the entire philosophy resonates, I think, with me and founders all around the world, because you are one, you have been one, and you understand the pains better than most. So I will continue to do so. And I think you know, a lot of founders. Well, I'll say this to those listening or watching that are founders. You know, even if you're just looking for information, your platform, your website is a treasure trove of information for founders. It's brilliant. And no, they've probably come across it already, right? Most entrepreneurs, when they Google something, you know, when they're just first starting out, are offered usually a response from your platform. It seems to be, in that sense, very, you know, very much a part and introduced people very early on in that journey. And so they've probably come across it and not even realized. And I would say continue to explore the rest of the articles that you've got and the information you provide both on your platform and on your LinkedIn and so on, because it's incredibly useful resource. So, well, look, I will, of course, include your LinkedIn profile and the SeedLegals website in the description of this episode for anyone who wants to check it out. For whatever reason, all the reasons we mentioned, either as an investor, as a founder, anyone just interested, or actively raising. But is there anywhere else that I should be, any other information I should be adding there? Anywhere else you want to direct people to, or is that pretty much it?
You know, SeedLegals resources, all completely free, ton of information, pretty much everything you're likely to need as a founder to grow your business, you're going to find there. And of course, if you want to talk to a human, hit the web chat bubble on our website. And if you want to talk to me, of course, I think I have a bit of a reputation for replying to emails at 2 a.m. Don't worry, I do get enough sleep. It's just that my days on Zoom calls all day. And then my evenings are between about 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. listening to music and replying to my day's emails.
Oh, man of my own heart. I like that. Yeah, yeah.
So, yes.
A fellow nocturnal, I see. Yes.
Exactly. And the good news, thanks to hybrid working, is that nobody in the office has discovered what time I actually get up in the morning. That said, they all know exactly what time I get up.
I was going to say, when this releases, they will, unfortunately. They'll have a sense of it.
Slack has a feature to set scheduled responses. I set all my late night responses to send at 9 a.m. So I'm not embarrassed about how late I'm up. And the team think I'm up at 9 a.m.
Of course, because as a founder, you have to be up at the crack of dawn, right? To the gym at 6.
I'm past that.
Yeah, it just goes to show how much BS is actually in this space, right? Do it how you want to do it and have fun. But look, it's been great chatting with you again. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate how generous you've been with your time, knowing how busy you are. And I really look forward to catching up again, either in person. But, you know, we'll probably see each other at some events. But we didn't even get a chance to talk about the event you put on. I just realized.
The SeedLegals Awards.
Yes, I didn't even ask you about that. I'm such an idiot. I didn't even ask you about that. So
very quickly, the SeedLegals Awards were amazing. My team came up about 9 months ago with this crazy idea of doing an award. So we're going to pick a bunch of categories, and then people can nominate, and then we'll vote, and we'll turn it into like a special evening. It's like, yeah, great. Let's do it in like 60 days time. Yeah. It's like, well, let's do it in 9 months time. What? You're crazy. Anyway, it turned out to be an amazing evening.
Yeah.
We rented out Battersea Arts Centre, which is previously Battersea Town Hall, an amazing building, about 450 people in the audience, 1,000 nominations, a great set of judges, of VCs and so on. We had Ollie Barrett as the host. Ollie Barrett has been the host for Great British Entrepreneur Awards and others for a decade. And it was a really great evening of UK founders and investors coming together to celebrate, you know, what's a difficult fundraising, but celebrate success for founders and the ability for founders to come up with amazing things. And, you know, for example, the overall winner was a company called Seafields that is using seaweed to capture carbon. They extract the nutrients from seaweeds to sell for fertilizer and animal feed, and then they sink the seaweed to the bottom of the sea, burying the carbon. So it's an entire ecosystem that helps the planet and makes money and replaces other, you know, bad fertilizer things as plant feed. So, you know, to help be part of that and promote that, and of course they're, you know, using SeedLegals for fundraising and so on, you know, is fantastic. So it was a very nice, worthy winner. And my co-founder is investing in the company as well. So I think that is fantastic. But many other winners as well, and across quite a range of areas. So yes, it was a really great evening, and it was quite a proud moment to see from, when I used to personally sit on beanbags outside the corridor in our office to not disturb everyone doing all those early sales calls, and
Right.
having the legal team manually build the documents because the platform wasn't working, through to
then suddenly
this
see
magnificent venue and a great number of
the
founders.
community that you've built and the founders that you've helped along the way. Yeah,
Exactly.
I was gutted. You might need to tell your team that my invite clearly got lost in the mail, so just maybe correct that error for the next one. But
absolutely.
Sorry I didn't ask you about that before. It only just occurred to me. But thanks for indulging me on that one. But I will let you go. So well done. Amazing to see all of the success you're having, and may it long continue, and I will continue to cheer you on. And thanks again for your time. I really
amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
My absolute pleasure. Have a wonderful rest of the week. We'll speak again very soon.
Okay. Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening and/or watching. Please like and subscribe and join in the conversation in the comments below.